Chapter 42. It's page 1125 in the Pew Bible. It's almost in the middle of your Bible if you're looking to figure out where it's about at. Isaiah 42, page 1125 in the Pew Bible. And Darlene already read it well this morning. I just would invite you to hear again these four verses from Isaiah chapter 42, the first four verses that are our text for this morning. Isaiah 42, verses 1 through 4. Starting in verse 1. Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. But in faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. And in his teaching, the islands will put their hope. This is the word of the Lord. Well, each week in Advent, we light another candle. We have a different theme as we count down toward Christmas Day. So third week, third candle, third theme. Theme is love. But this morning, I want us to consider love, but I want us to consider a different love this morning. What was read this morning as we consider the third candle of love, particularly we're talking about Christ and God, the Father's love for us. But this morning I want you to start by considering something else, the love and devotion for Jesus that has been a fact of this world for 2,000 years. What is it about Jesus that inspires such love and devotion from so many? This has been a fact of our world. It's right there in the earliest Gospels. The disciples, his 12 apostles who were closest to him. They were often a mess. They often failed, but they loved him. They left everything to follow him. Or think of those other disciples, Mary and Martha in John chapter 12. Mary comes and anoints his feet with a priceless gift of an anointing oil, a fragrant oil. She breaks it and pours out her most expensive item probably in her life on the feet of Jesus. Such love and devotion. It's there in the Gospels. It's there in the earliest church. Pliny the Younger is a Roman governor. 112 AD, he wrote, after having gone out on behalf of the emperor to examine Christian practices, Christian gatherings. He gives us one of the earliest accounts of what Christians were doing in the first century. And one of the things that stands out to him, he says they're full of superstition. He really doesn't like Christians. But one of the things he says is, they sing hymns to Christ as to a god. From the earliest days, Christians gathered to sing love songs to Jesus. And what we know from the earliest days of the church, beyond even the disciples, is that they would not just sing to him, they would lay down their lives for him. That phenomenon has only increased and spread across the globe. We have heard such beautiful music this morning, a testament to all the different kinds of songs that have been written to Jesus. But in my life, over my 40-some years, I've had the privilege to hear Jesus sung to not only in English and some of the various styles of the church, but I've heard in the townships of Durban, South Africa, in Zulu, choirs sing praise to Jesus. I got to sit with pastors in an underground church in China and hear brothers and sisters in Mandarin sing praise to Jesus. And some years ago, on a trip to New York City, I heard two young men who were from India sing devotional praise to Jesus in Hindi, in the style of Indian music. What is it about Jesus globally and historically that inspires such love and devotion. It's not just then, it's now. In fact, just this weekend I was reading Bono, the front lead singer for U2, just released his memoir. In it, apparently, he writes these words. Read an article in which Bono is quoted of first hearing the Bible. And this is what he said: "The Bible held me rapt. The words stepped off the page and followed me home." But it was not just the Bible that got Bono's attention. It was the one the Bible testifies to. Bono writes in this memoir, "I'd always be the first up in those days when there was an altar call, the come to Jesus moment." He says, "I still am. If I was in a cafe right now and someone said, 'Stand up if you're ready to give your life to Jesus,' I'd stand up right there." What is it about Jesus that inspires such love and devotion? 1 Peter 1:8 says these words, which maybe you have experienced. "Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your soul. Though you have not seen him, you love him." Now, last few weeks, we've been looking at the glory, the unique glory of Jesus, the glory of his word, the glory of his rule. And I would say the thing that makes our hearts really sing is not just the glory of his rule, as good as that is. It's the glory of his rule combined with the glory of his mercy. And the prophet Isaiah speaks of both. This morning, I want you to see with me in Isaiah 42, 1 through 4, look at this Jesus who inspires such love and devotion. And in these 4 simple verses, see what it is about him. My prayer is that by looking at these verses, we would see what it is about him that is so glorious, that inspires such love. You'll see in just these 4 verses, I hope you'll see 3 things. In verses 1 and 2, this humble hero. That's what we see. This prophecy of Jesus, the humble hero. In verse 3, in verse 3, we see his ministry of mercy. And then in verse 4, his strength to finish the work. That's what I hope we'll see. This humble hero, and then both his ministry of mercy and his strength to finish the work. Consider these with me as we consider Jesus, who's at the heart of Christmas and the heart of the celebration of Advent. The first thing we see here is the humble hero. And do you see that there? This is a prophecy of someone who is coming, a servant. This is the prophet speaking the word of God. So this is God speaking here through his prophet in verses 1 through 4, announcing the coming of a servant who will be a mighty servant. It is a servant of the Lord who God will uphold, who God has chosen, all in verse 1, in whom God delights. This one who God says, I have called this one and uniquely chosen this one and will uniquely uphold this one. And boy, this one I really love. I delight in him. In fact, the Lord says, I will put my spirit on him and he will bring justice to the nations. This is a hero with a massive purpose. He is significant for all nations. Do you hear that? Called from among Israel, but relevant to all people. Universal significance. God says, this hero I have chosen for the good of every person in every nation. The chosen one who will come and will bring justice to the nations. Now, who is this significant person? In fact, a couple of times nations comes out. If you look down in verse 4, that's this concept of this global reach of the servant is also there. He will not falter or be discouraged, verse 4, till he establishes justice on earth. In his teaching, the islands will put their hope. The earth and the islands does not mean a tropical island off somewhere. The islands was Israel's way, another way of Israel speaking of all the far-flung places that we can't even imagine or know across the sea. Places like Maine to the ancient Israelite. All of the earth, everywhere, this servant will come and bring justice, will establish his teaching, will be a source of hope. This is a hero, a vast hero, a global historical hero that is being announced. So what will this one be like? What would you imagine a hero of world historical significance to be like? Maybe think of some of the heroes we have in popular culture. Maybe like a Marvel superhero, swooping in, smashing around, wearing a costume, making smart, witty remarks. Maybe some fantasy hero swinging a sword, magical power shooting out of the fingertips, demonstration of power. Maybe like one of the people I used to watch and cheer for, some cowboy frontier lawman, swaggering in, knocking somebody out, strutting and gruff in the movies. What will this hero be like? What might we imagine? Isaiah goes on, the Lord goes on to announce not only the coming of the hero, but what this hero is like. And this hero is striking not just in his power, but striking in his humility. Because listen to verse 2. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. Now, wait a minute. What? Now, I want you to know, and I think you know this, but it's worth saying, Jesus is strong. He's the strongest man to ever walk on the earth. He never backed down from any necessary confrontation, ever. He was willing to speak the truth to power in ways that ultimately got him killed, and when he knew his death was coming, he walked toward it, not away from it. The text is clear about his strength. He will bring justice to the whole earth. His law, his teaching or his law will fill the earth. And yet, he's a strong hero, and yet he's humble. Listen again to verse 2. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. One of the best commentaries on Isaiah, I believe, and others have said, is one by a British scholar named Alec Motyer. Motyer looks at these words here that are translated, at least in the NIV, shout or cry out or raise his voice. And he looks at the Hebrews, a Hebrew scholar, and he points out, draws out what these mean. He says, he will not shout, which suggests, Motyer writes, that which startles. Now that's what a shout is, right? You shout at somebody. He won't be startling on the screen. In fact, he won't be crying out. He says the Hebrew term indicates an attempt to dominate or shout others down. Isn't that interesting? He won't be coming bold and brash and just trampling over people, shouting them down, yelling out to them. Or he won't shout or cry out or even raise his voice. It seems to be, Motyer says, what seems to be indicated is here is not one who is like so many figures we have in the modern world, who has to come announcing their strength, their power, and pushing down forcefully anyone and everyone who stands in their way. He won't come shouting and full of hot takes. He won't come shouting and domineering and pushing people down. Instead, he will come with a kind of humility. In fact, in Matthew chapter 12, the gospel writer, Matthew, says explicitly, he names names, saying who it is that fulfills Isaiah chapter 42. He quotes it, the gospel writer does. But I just want you to hear in Matthew chapter 12, the way in which he announces this. This is what Matthew writes about Jesus' fulfillment. Jesus who's so strong, and yet Jesus' humility in the way that he carried himself in this world. Matthew chapter 12, verses 15 and 16 say this. Jesus was followed by a large crowd, and he healed all who were ill, and he warned them not to tell others about him. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Here is my servant, he will not quarrel or cry out. Now, that is often stunning, isn't it, about Jesus? One of the things that stands out when we read it. Why wouldn't Jesus say, hey, tell everybody about me? In the right way, he did. What the Gospels, though, are indicating is Jesus was not about making himself famous in the terms of worldly fame. He was not about being popular in the way in which the world seeks popularity. And he was not about self-aggrandizing building of a superficial movement. He came humbly, willing to serve and often serve in the background, Jesus, in saving the world. And this is on display, of course, in the way which he was born, not in Rome or Jerusalem or Washington, D.C. or New York or Boston or L.A., but in like a small Maine town, like Buckfield. Anybody from Buckfield? Not picking on Buckfield. He came not born, of course, in a palace. It's said every year, but it's worth considering, isn't it? He was born to a young mother, a poor girl, no money, no fashion, no luxury, no training as a mother, a virgin. He was held by the callous hands of a carpenter father. And his humility in his birth would only be displayed more powerfully in his suffering and death. Jesus is the humble hero, bringing a kingdom in which the greatest seek the lowest place, in which the most powerful quietly and secretly give their lives away for others. It's the nature of his kingdom. And as we think of this, as you see this humble hero, that gets played out in the way he treats others. So the humble hero that is prophesied goes on, not surprisingly, to have a ministry of mercy. Look at verse 3. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Now, this is a picture of his ministry, and particularly his ministry to the bruised and the broken. A bruised reed. Let's get clear on what these two images are. A bruised reed. What's a reed? I'm not trying to insult you, but let's just think clearly about this morning. It's a marshland plant, right? Something like what someone might call a cattail. In our context, Richard Sibbes, who is a Puritan preacher, says what is described here is not an oak, but a reed. Not an oak. Not an oak, but a reed. An oak, you can wear yourself out all day trying to knock one of those over, right? A reed, you snap. And not just a reed that is already not very strong, but one that is bruised. You know what the bruised reed is? That means that is one that has been hit or pressured in some way so that what is already not strong is now barely holding on. If you're weak and then bruised, if you're a reed that has been bruised, you are in the point of almost falling over. Here comes one of global significance who comes so humbly and so gently that he comes to those who are right on the edge of losing it. And he is so gentle. When he deals with you, he will not break you. That's what he's saying. Not just that. Look at the second thing. A bruised reed he will not break. So gentle will his ministry of mercy be. But also a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. What's a smoldering wick? Any of you light any Christmas candles and have some smoldering wicks this season? Maybe because the wick is old or is kind of melted down in or something. But, a wick that's just kind of like just sputtering. And, obviously what you eventually do at some point with that in our culture is you just throw it out and you get another one, right? If it won't work. This might also indicate like an oil lamp wick that hasn't been trimmed well and maybe is dirty and is failing. So it's a sputtering, smoldering wick. It's a wick, you've experienced this, that gives off more black smoke than heat and light because it's about to go out. What we have again is a picture of something that is right on the edge of falling apart. But Jesus doesn't throw it out. A smoldering wick, he doesn't snuff out. It's again a picture of weakness. Not a bonfire or blazing torch, a smoldering wick. And Jesus comes, this humble hero, with a ministry of mercy. A ministry that will be particularly good news to any and everyone who would say from the depth of their heart, I am a bruised reed. I am a smoldering wick. I am barely holding it together. And Jesus says, wonderful, I am for you. You know, this is important because maybe you think, I think it's worth saying this from time to time. Maybe sometimes we might think about Christianity from the outside, and someone might think, you know, I could never be a good Christian. Because to be a Christian, I think sometimes people think this, maybe you don't. But if you do, sometimes people think to be a good Christian, you have to be disciplined, you have to be capable, you have to have a lot of faith. Christian people, you know, good Christian people, they have it all together. That's what you have to be a Christian. No. Jesus welcomes those who are poor in spirit, who confess their neediness and emptiness. Or maybe you think, I know I am a Christian somehow, can't believe it, but I just, you know, I must not be a very good one because it's hard. And I feel sometimes like I'm right on the edge, barely holding on. My faith is, if I'm honest, flickering at times, dealing with doubt. My spirit sometimes feel like I'm just barely holding on. I'm a Christian, but barely. You know what? Jesus is for you. I think the experience of being a bruised reed and a smoldering wick is not the exception in Christian faith, but is actually some of the moments in which we most perfectly, in our ability, in which we most truly, better word, most truly live out what it means to be a Christian at all. Because Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Because Jesus is one who comes and says, if you're barely holding on, I have come for you, not to break you or snuff you out, but to make you strong and hold you up. This is a humble hero who has a ministry of mercy to the bruised and to the broken, and who is strong enough to finish the work that he begins. He's a humble hero with a ministry of worship, with a ministry of mercy. We see his ministry of mercy, and we see his strength to finish the work. Look at the last part of verse 3 and verse 4. In his faithfulness, he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged until he establishes justice on earth. And in his teaching, the islands will put their hope. Here is this one who will bring hope to the world, to the islands, to faraway places, who will establish justice on earth. This is the great promise that Jesus is one who will make things right from in the whole globe. He is strong enough to do that, and this strength is particularly brought out in verse 4, the end of verse 3 and verse 4. In his faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged until he does it. Motyer again points out that these two words, falter or be discouraged, are actually the same root words in Hebrew as smoldering and bruised. In other words, isn't that interesting? We are smoldering wicks. We are bruised reeds. If you haven't been yet, you probably will be at some point. But Jesus is one who came into this world to feel the same forces that almost snuff us out, to take the same hits that bruise us to the breaking point. But Jesus never breaks, never fails, never sins, never gives up until the work is finished for us. He is strong to do what we could not. He is faithful to finish what He started. Which means we have again in Jesus one who is humble and trustworthy, but also strong through to the end of our days. This too is Christian faith and joy. It is not Christian joy and Christian faith, we'll talk about joy next week, is not having a trust in ourselves that we will be able to make it through with a little help from God. We are smoldering wicks and bruised reeds. This is a little bit like I had a car once that was a smoldering wick. You know what I mean? You ever had one of those? So every time I would set out, it was an adventure. Am I going to make it there or not? Right? Trusting in our own strength and ability, trying to find joy. And look, God has made us strong. He is able to hold you up. He has made deep wells of resilience in you. But ultimately, none of us are strong enough on our own to see this through to the end, or to be the kind of people we need to be. But that's okay. We don't trust in ourselves, but in Jesus. Jesus, who is strong enough to get us all the way to the end, to bring us all the way there, so that one day we too will see the kind of justice and peace and hope and resurrection life fill the earth that we long for most deeply. This is Jesus. And it's in this strange combination of attributes that His glory is most perfectly seen. Jonathan Edwards wrote not an Advent sermon, but I think I think of it every year in Advent. A sermon, Jonathan Edwards wrote sermons like this. He would preach for over an hour, and he wrote sermons with titles like this: On the Admirable Conjunction of Diverse Excellencies in the Person of Jesus. That's an Advent sermon to thrill the heart. It actually is. What his point is, Jonathan Edwards' point is, meditating on Revelation chapter 5, in which Jesus, in just a matter of a few verses, is depicted as a lion and a lamb. A lion and a lamb who was slain in just a few verses. Edwards says, this is the glory of Jesus. He's both at once. In this world, we see so much strength that is abused and over the top and powerful and proud. And then we see weakness and humility over here. And what you see in Jesus is gentleness and strength perfectly together. What you see in Jesus is a lion who can roar and defend you, and a lamb who will not break you when you're at the breaking point. What you see in Jesus is one who is high and lifted up, seated in a place of glory, to one to whom all of the earth will give allegiance, one of incredible glory who comes down in absolute perfect humility. Both. What you see is one who says, I want to make you, and I demand that you be all that you can be, holy. And who says, for your failure, I will give grace and the strength to become what you couldn't on your own. He is a humble hero, full of grace and truth and mercy and strength. And when we see him, we say with Peter, we love him. And we have this hope. Even though we do not see him physically right now, we believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For he is giving us, even right now, the salvation of our souls. as we prepare to sing our last song in worship of this Jesus, would you take a moment with me to ask the Lord to prepare and to speak His word, Father, by His Spirit to our hearts?